So on behalf of our Active Women's Health Initiative, I want to take this opportunity to say welcome and thank you all for joining us. Whether you're in person here with us in the room or joining us virtually on Zoom. We have an outstanding panel here ready to share their stories and their Title IX experiences with you. But before we do that, I just want to take a few moments to introduce our initiative to you, and then we'll get right to introducing our moderator for today. Molly, you want to go ahead and share the presentation? So just from a logistics standpoint, we are going to spend a few minutes doing welcomes and introductions, and then we'll dive into a discussion for about 45 minutes to an hour. And we have plenty of time set up for question and answer at the end, as well as fellowship and continued conversation. So please help yourselves to coffee, some pastries, some fruit, whatever your thing is there. All right, next slide. Our initiative is housed in the Sports Medicine Research Institute here in the College of Health Sciences. And that's all under the umbrella of the University of Kentucky. And this initiative was co-founded by Dr. Mary Lloyd Ireland, who's up here on our panel today, and Dr. Hannah Hoke, who is teaching this morning and couldn't be with us. Our team is made up of researchers, clinicians, and community members, many of whom were female athletes themselves, or coaches, or administrators, or all of the above, as you'll hear today. And our goal, our mission, is to optimize health and promote physical activity and wellness for girls and women across the lifespan. And today is really part of that mission. We work through research, outreach, and education to achieve that mission. So it is my pleasure to welcome this amazing panel and our moderator, Thalethia Routt. And before I invite Thalethia to introduce our panelists today, I would like to give her the introduction that is due. She is the Acting Associate Vice President for Institutional Equity and Equal Opportunity, and is responsible for upholding the institution's commitment to equal opportunity in academic programs, employment, services, and activities. She has more than 20 years of legal experience in private practice and in the public sector, including over 15 years with the university's Office of Legal Counsel. Thalethia has served on the university's Equal Opportunity Committee, the DEI Supplier Diversity Project, and is a member of the DEI Leadership Team and the 2022 Women's Executive Leadership Development Program cohort. She is also a member of the Fayette County Public Schools Board of Education Equity Council Committee. Those are a mouthful. She's a native of Berea, Kentucky. She has her undergraduate degree from the University of Louisville and her law degree from the University of Kentucky. She's a member of the Kentucky Bar Association. She's on the board of directors for the Lexington Fair Housing Council and a mother member of the Central Kentucky chapter, Jack and Jill of America. So please help me in giving Thalethia Routt a warm UK welcome.
Do I need to use this? Yes, please. Well, thank you. Thank you for the warm welcome, and thank you all for allowing me to moderate this excellent panel discussion today. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists. I'll start to my immediate left with Kathy DeBoer. Kathy DeBoer is the Executive Director of the American Volleyball Coaches Association, a position she has held since February 1st, 2006. Membership has doubled during her tenure. DeBoer is widely credited for leading the effort to get beach volleyball recognized as a collegiate sport. Prior to the American Volleyball Coaches Association, DeBoer spent 23 years in intercollegiate athletics, serving as a coach, administrator, and fundraiser. She spent 18 years at the University of Kentucky, first as its head volleyball coach, and finishing as the senior associate athletics director. She started her career at Ferris State University in Michigan. DeBoer was a college athlete in volleyball, basketball, and tennis. She was a finalist for the Wade Trophy. She was a finalist for the Wade Trophy and played 2 years of professional basketball after college. She is a nationally known speaker on the impact of gender on competitive behavior in business and sports settings. Her first book, Gender and Competition, How Men and Women Approach Work and Play Differently, was published in 2004. She has a BA in Humanities from Michigan State and an MBA from the University of Kentucky. She's married to Mark Pittman and resides here in Lexington. Next, we have Dr. Mary Lloyd Ireland. Dr. Ireland is now a sports medicine physician at the UK Orthopedic Surgery and Sports Medicine. She was an Olympian team doctor in 1992 at the Summer Games in Barcelona. During her time as an Olympic team doctor, she primarily worked with members of the women's basketball team and the gymnastics team. She joined the team here at UK in 2008. A native of Lexington, Dr. Ireland grew up playing sports. During her time as a student at Sayre School, she played field hockey and basketball and also was a swimmer. In 1972 and 1976, Dr. Ireland competed for the chance to join the United States swim team. She missed making the team by 0.2 of a second. No, over it completely. After the Olympics, she returned to Lexington and built a sports medicine program in private practice and served as a team physician for UK athletics for 12 years, becoming the first woman to serve as a team physician for a Division I football team. And finally, we have Dr. Joe Hanathan. Dr. Hannafin is board certified in orthopedic surgery and sports medicine. She is an attending orthopedic surgeon and professor of orthopedic surgery at the Weill Cornell Medical College. She retired her clinical practice on May 31st, 2021, and now serves as the vice chair of the Hospital for Special Surgery Institutional Review Board. She was a clinician scientist with a focus on basic and translational research. She was a physician at the 1996, 2004, 2012, and 2016 Olympic Games as a team physician for the U.S. rowing for 27 years. She's been a team physician for the New York Liberty for 16 years and is a member of the FISA Medical Commission. Dr. Hannafin was the first female president of the American Orthopedic Society for Sports Medicine and has served on their board. She received the Orthopedic Research Society New Investigator Recognition Award, the O'Donoghue Award for Excellence in Research, the Rovere Award, the Jack Kelly Award from U.S. Rowing for Outstanding Contribution, and the ORS Women's Leadership Award. She is an honorary medical officer of the New York City Fire Department and received a Lifetime Achievement Award from HHS in 2014. In 2021, Dr. Hannafin received the AOSSM Robert E. Leach Sports Medicine Leadership Award and was inducted into their Hall of Fame. Clearly, I'm at a table full of overachievers. For the first question, I'm going to like for each of you to tell me, what does Title IX mean to you? And could you share a story about the impact of Title IX on your lives?
So Title IX, 50 years ago, is the reason that I'm sitting here. I've had a career in intercollegiate athletics. I won't go all the way back to the beginning, but I will simply tell you that my parents were raising me a lot with their eyes closed, hoping that good examples and good training would help me grow out of the tendencies that I had and the tomboy that I was. When I was 50, and they were at that point in their 80s, they said, okay, we got it. So you can actually have a career in this. And so we're proud of you. So I had to wait a long time. Title IX is why I'm here. Guess I'd have to echo that I was a tomboy. Just enjoyed the outdoors and everything outdoors that I could, whether it was climbing trees or riding bikes. And I just wanted to briefly read those 37 words that today marks the 50th year that President Nixon signed those into law. No person in the U.S. shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, deny the benefits of, or subjected to discrimination under any educational program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. Activity was a key word in this, because if activity was not included in this law, sports may not have been included in this law. So I think that was very strategic. And, we celebrate 50 years, but it really took probably till some other things for institution of this law. And that probably took to like 94. So I graduated from high school, probably most of you were born, but that was 1970. And fortunately, my school, Sears School, had opportunities for a lot of sports for girls. So I did everything, and I was best at swimming. And we actually had a swim team because I was a swimmer and we could do well in the state meets because we grabbed some other people who could kind of swim. So that's how we started a swim team, as opposed to usually with so it worked out. But Title IX means to me that when I graduated from high school, I was discouraged from continuing in sports. And I found that my passion and my organization to do well academically was by having a structure and competing. And so I continued. I quit swimming maybe for 6 months, a semester, and I just was not happy. So I decided to continue to swim. And there wasn't a lot of opportunities for indoor 50-meter pools in the Southeast, but Memphis State had that opportunity. So I ended up swimming at Memphis State, and we talked about unsuccessfully, but tried out for the Olympics. And I think that I didn't set my goals high enough. And so I think there are a lot of things that Title IX does for young girls, and it's to, set your goals high and compete and do the best that you can. And I continued to compete through medical school as well. So that was something that gave me structure. It made me be able to study and be a better person, and also just gives you passion for living and being active and things like that. So Title IX helped me in my professional career because there were more women to take care of, even professional women. So I think that really helped. And it opened some doors by my being an athlete to be able to take care of teams like the UK football team. And Coach Claiborne was quoted, and Mark Higgs was quoted, that we don't care if she's a girl or a boy or a whatever color she is, as long as she knows what she's doing, then that's okay with us. So sometimes those doors don't open, but I think Title IX has helped a lot of doors open for women that weren't there before.
So I can echo, Title IX in certain ways is responsible for me being here in my 30 plus year career. I went to a Catholic girls' school, so we had sports as well. And I swam and played basketball and played softball, and then went to college. And I started college in 1973. And there were, really, I didn't have the opportunity to participate in sports when I first got there. It just built a brand new swimming natatorium. And my hallmate had been recruited from Maine to come and swim for Brown. So there were actually scholarships for women at that point for swimming. And so she said, you should come walk on for the JV, just, so you can do something. I thought, okay. And so I walked on to the JV swim team. I swam my freshman year. And towards the end of my freshman year, word got around that there was a woman who was starting a rowing team. I had never heard of rowing. I had never seen the sport. I didn't know anything about it. And the JV swim coach had rowed for 1 year in college. So she was tagged to be the new head coach for the women's rowing team. And literally it changed my life. I found my sport. I still row to this day. I met my husband at a boathouse. I have a daughter who rowed. And it opened doors by teaching me resilience and hard work and teamwork. In a rowing boat, there's no superstar. You're a superstar on an ergometer, but you get in the boat, you're not rowing with the other people, it doesn't work. And I think that the sport of rowing brought me through orthopedic surgery. It brought me through a lot of things in my life because I just had the resilience to go through it because of what I had done as a sport. So it literally made me who I am.
One of her favorite books is Boys in the Boat. I challenge her to do Girls in the Boat.
Could all of you just make sure you speak really close to the mic? Oh, thank you. Thank you.
The next question I want to ask you all is, in what ways has Title IX fulfilled the mission of ending sex-based discrimination in education?
So I can speak to the sports part of it. And I think the biggest evidence that Title IX has succeeded is the fact that if you go onto this campus and ask the women athletes at UK to explain to you what Title IX is and what it says and what it does, they'll go, Title what? So I would give you the counterexample of a place where we have not had this kind of success. So women athletes don't feel on a daily basis that they are underserved or underprivileged. You would never say that to an African American, or you would never hear it. Like civil rights, we have not yet succeeded. So Title IX, we're not finished. We're certainly not finished, but we have made enough progress so that 50 years later, most of the student athletes, female student athletes, don't even know what the law is, much less that it is why they're there.
Yeah, I think history is very important. I think we have to teach history a little bit differently because a poll was done by the University of Maryland, and of children now, 70% had no idea what they were and 50% of parents. So I think it's a very important thing to look back on. We're getting more equal in our athletes. There now are 60,000 more men than women as far as statistically competing still. So it's not totally equal, but one of the problems that men, I think, and administrators thought was that when this law was passed, then they're going to eliminate male sports, and then we should not like that, the guys. So in actuality, there have been increases in both men and women at over the last 50 years. Men have gone up 1.5 and women like 6.5 as far as the amount of fold of. So we're increasing, and we've got 500,000 people at the collegiate level competing. So, and those are scholarships that we didn't really have the opportunity to do. I think there's a lot more to do in equality, certainly in certain subspecialties in medicine. And I think we need to encourage girls to be athletic and to be able to know they can do whatever they want to do, and probably at an earlier age, make that known to them. Orthopedics still is 7% of board certified orthopedists in AOS, but they're 15% of candidate members are female. So there still is a disparity, and these underrepresented minorities need to increase in our subspecialty. And as orthopedists, we were told you're too weak and you're too female to do orthopedics, but it's more about how to do it and not the brutane part of it. So finesse as opposed to brute. So I do think that there are still some disparities in certain specialties, and ours is one of them.
I would comment, I think on the collegiate level, at Division I level, I think there's equity when it comes to men and women in sports. I think when you get to high school, I still don't think we're there. I read a piece in the New York Times that profiled a mom who had filed a lawsuit because under Title IX, because her daughter played for a softball team, and they played on a field that was rutted and had holes. And she looked across at where the boys team played, and they had fantastic, almost professional appearing baseball facility. And so I do think it's going to require parents to continue to stay involved. And my husband always says the biggest proponents of Title IX are the parents of teenage girls, because they want them to have a scholarship to go to college. They want them to be able to be exposed. There's clear data that if you look at success in women who've made it to CEOs of businesses, many of those women were athletes. And so it changes the way you think about the world and the way you approach interactions. But I think when it comes to neighborhoods where parents don't have the money to file a lawsuit, I think that's where, working nationally to try and improve access to sports for girls in inner cities or in the countryside where there's not a big push and there's not funding available to file a lawsuit. That part, we're not there yet. And Nancy Hogshead is working on kind of a national program to try and continue to expand the opportunities for women in sports and girls in sports in particular at all levels.
What are some of the misconceptions that you've encountered when discussing Title IX?
I think the first misconception is that it takes away sports from boys. It may change in a college program, may change a men's sport from a varsity sport to a club sport, because I went to Brown University and there was a huge uproar a couple of years ago when they reset what were the varsity sports and what were the club sports. And they did it to maintain gender equity across the university. And they did it based on results. So if there were varsity teams that had not made it to a certain level many years in a row, and there was a women's club team that was, knocking their socks off, those were shifted. And there was a lot of pushback from the alums when some of the sports were demoted to club sport. But I think you have to reward people for their success, and you have to be equal across the board. And the International Olympic Committee has now talked to all of the international governing bodies. So rowing, which is World Rowing or FISA, we now at the World Championships have an equal number of men and women competing and an equal number of spots at the Olympic Games for male and female rowers. So the IOC is pushing that mandate as well.
I think if you look at the Olympians, there are a lot more sex similarities now in the numbers. And I do think that, particularly administrators, and you may speak to this, but early on with Title IX, it's like, we're just going to destroy men's sports. And, we dropped wrestling here, but I think the way to do it with like club and varsity is, and we have to communicate, because some administrators maybe didn't have open eyes with this and thought it was a terrible thing.
I mean, certainly Title IX is about resource allocation, and the people in leadership roles have to make those decisions. I would say the number one, and this is going to be very self-interested, the number one misconception that I see is that Title IX requires a sport-to-sport comparison for compliance. And so what that does is that actually institutionalizes the popular male sports with women's sports. So basketball, more popular male counterpart. Soccer, baseball, softball. And again, I'm not against investment in any of those sports. They should be invested in. But what Title IX has showed us is that women will prefer sports that men don't prefer. So here's where it gets self-interested. So the number one participation sport in high schools today is girls volleyball. Okay, 60,000 more girls. And it does not there's 60,000 boys playing. We're all in favor of that. We're not against additions for boys, and it's not against Title IX. But girls have chosen to play volleyball, and so the investment at the collegiate level and other places needs to be in what girls have chosen. Girls have chosen cheerleading. I'm old enough that I know when I started in sports, cheerleading was like, you gotta be kidding me. That's not a sport. Okay, that's on the sideline, not participating. That's not true today. That's a competitive discipline. Dance is very highly favored by girls. More girls in field hockey. More girls in gymnastics. And so Title IX says, you look at your entire program, and if you're putting this much money on the boys' side, then you need to have comparable investment on the girls' side, and it's not just sport to sport.
In your particular career fields, what are some of the current challenges that you face that are related to Title IX?
I don't know if you can directly relate it to Title IX, but there is a link. In 1994, a primary care partner and myself started a women's sports medicine center at the Hospital for Special Surgery, because we found that women were coming to see us after their third or fourth opinion where they were not being taken seriously. if you were a high school collegiate athlete, you got the attention you needed. But if you're a post-collegiate athlete, you didn't. So a woman who wanted to come back to running after having a baby and didn't know how to get back the best way. And we faced an enormous amount of pushback that the reason we were starting this program was only because we were trying to take patients away from the men. But it was really about service to this community of active women who ranged from 12 to 75 or so. What's fascinating is 30 years later, that still kind of exists. And it's not directly related to Title IX, but it's related to the view of participation in sports and activity. And, you can be a weekend warrior. Most weekend warriors always tended to be male. And that was the way it was. And now there's this huge group of women who grew up around Title IX or some before, who discovered the beauty of sport when they hadn't seen it when they were young. And so, I think it all kind of relates to Title IX. We were talking this morning and Mary Lloyd asked me if I was still competing as a rower. And I said, no, because the women who are my age who are competing train like 10 times a week. And I just couldn't do that anymore. And the vast majority are women who learned about the sport of rowing on the sidelines of a river or a lake watching their kids row and said, I want to do that. And many of them were the pre-Title IX group of women who never had access and now have embraced this with an intensity that is mind-boggling, or I can't compete against them, and that's okay. But, I think it all kind of links together, and I don't think we're done with it. I think the educational piece of it and opportunities for sport, even if it's not something that requires federal funding, which most sports post-college don't, that's really what Title IX applies to, is if you've received federal funding. But I think we need to encourage, and that's what the Women's Health Initiative is doing also, women to keep participating just for the rest of their lives, for their health and their sanity and all the other things that sport gives us.
And I think our initiative is one that we want to empower girls to be active and continue to be active. And there's certain sports like swimming. I didn't swim for a long time, but now I'm back swimming, or equestrian. I will say a couple of challenges are in our country that junior soccer athlete, female, who tears her anterior cruciate ligament, I need to keep her out for 6 months. But the showcases are going to happen in 2 weeks. So she has to be back. And the concern is that we're jeopardizing some of the health, long-term health of these girls by pushing them, or their parents push them, because a scholarship is a big deal, right? I mean, it's, $200,000 that they don't have to pay maybe. And so that's a challenge. And I've always been honest with patients, and if they want to go somewhere else, but it takes a time to get over an ACL, and it's not faster, it's safer return. And Kathy mentioned cheerleading. I do think that when I ask a cheerleader in their 30s, would they do it again? They all say no, because they have back pain, they have perhaps some eating disorders, and it's a very serious issue. And now they are pushed where I think we need a better support system for them to train like other athletes. They are definitely athletes, but they have just not a way to train like you would train if you're training your volleyball athletes. So taking time off and getting stronger and making sure nutritionally. So I do think we have some challenges with making sure we're the advocates for our athletes and not allowing them to do bad things in their youth as they're getting more and more active and athletically competitive.
Well, I know why I titled this panel Three Overachievers and a Jock, because people who are going to participate, these two, Thalethia, these are sports where you throw up every day. So I'm just here to tell everybody, you don't need to do that. Volleyball, we do not throw up every day. Okay. But if you want to be a doctor and a really big shot, go into swimming and rowing and stuff. If you just want to kind of be normal, volleyball is your choice. All right. But I would say that the biggest thing that I see 50 years into this is a tendency for women to internalize their second-class status. And this doesn't just happen in sport, but it's where I run into it. And so a very quick example in the summertime on college campuses, football players are in for 8 weeks, getting summer school, getting training, getting strength and conditioning, getting coaching. Volleyball players are not allowed to get coaching. The school chooses whether they want to fund their summer school. And football then comes in for 31 days of preseason. Volleyball comes in for 17. And we are finding not nearly enough women who are hacked off about this and who are saying this is unfair. Now, you look at a place like UK, because of rights fees in the Southeastern Conference, football is a profit producer here. That's only true at about 60 schools. The other 200 that have football teams are doing the same thing from a training standpoint. This is not about money. And so some of where we have to keep encouraging women is you deserve to have the same training opportunities that guys have to get ready and prepare for your sport.
I think that ties nicely into the next question. Where are there still opportunities or areas of need for promoting equity in educational settings?
Okay. All right. Well, so some of this. All right. Let's just. I drive every morning past down the Arboretum Way, and I don't know what the name of the street is because I've only lived here for 35 years. But and past the baseball stadium and the softball stadium. Okay, it's going to look at it. It's going to sound like a cheap shot at the place that I worked for 25 years. It's not intended, but you look at the baseball stadium and the softball stadium. Those are two programs at UK that are both losing over $1 million at least. Okay. And those facilities are way different. And so, there are places right now where there is Title IX violations that are codified in NCAA rules. So now institutions can hide behind, well, it's an NCAA rule. I can't do this for the women. These are places where we need to, 50 years into this, we have to say no more.
It's a hard act to follow. I know I gave you the mic. That's strike one. So I do think that women don't speak up loudly enough. And this is where, again, our initiative girls can, you got to, if there's a problem with abuse, if there's a problem with something you don't like, you have to speak up. And I think you learn that at an early age to speaking up and making sure you know who to speak. St. Anthony stated, actions speak louder than words, but let your words teach and your actions speak. And I've always thought, I'll actions speak louder than words, but I think it's time to speak. We need to speak up. And I think that, I can't even tell you, maybe as an orthopedic resident, how much should have a big brick on my shoulder, how much I've abused, but you just got through it. It's kind of being an athlete. It's like, okay, well, let's tee it up and do it again. And, so they're just, whether I was called a nurse or called other things. And now I think it's good to increase that awareness of the needle would need to maybe go too far one way, but I think that that's something that we do need to learn how to speak up for ourselves. And I would agree that there are inequalities that I'm just learning about.
I just want to correct one misconception. We don't throw up on a regular basis.
Right. No, in swimming, we don't either because it goes in the gutter. So.
I'm not sure what the next step is. It's almost like there needs to be a rebirth to look at the areas where there's still major discrepancies and find a way to have parents be able to be vocal, to have athletes be able to be vocal, to have opportunity. But if you've never seen the opportunity, you don't know the opportunity exists. So for example, one thing that U.S. Rowing is doing is they're on a mission to increase the number of underrepresented minorities in rowing. And rowing is always viewed as a Harvard, Yale, tall white men's sport. But the changes are happening. And there's a fellow named Arshay Cooper who is literally in Chicago, built this whole rowing program for inner city kids in Chicago. And that has now spread all over the country, where a program has started called STEM to Stern. And volunteers come to coach high school athletes who come from schools where the sport of rowing doesn't exist, and then also get involved in teaching STEM subjects. So this is a 5-day-a-week program, and it's for boys and girls, but it will probably impact the girls even more than the boys, I think. And that sort of stuff, grassroots stuff, needs to happen. And this started with one program in Chicago and then has been picked up. A lot of the collegiate rowing programs, their athletes are now teaching in the STEM part of the program, and their coaches are helping to coach. And we have to sort of change the view of who an athlete is in the United States.
I do think it has to start early and have mentors and athletes, maybe of swimming or whatever. And our orthopedic community is trying to address, patients want to be taken care of by doctors that look like them. And most orthopedists are khaki pants and, blue shirt and a tie. So we're trying to change that with both race and sex.
I dressed that way through my whole residency, so I would look like everybody else.
I don't think I did, but I didn't wear a skirt.
This is not on the list of questions that you all provided with, but I'm interested in knowing, in a perfect world, if we came back in 10, 15 years, what would the impact of Title IX look like?
So in a perfect world, okay, we get to pick perfect. So unlimited resources, because that's always where the fights come, is resource allocation. But so if we take the resources and we divide them by, as Title IX requires, the proportion of the gender in each school, male and female, which today in colleges and universities is 60% women. So quick Title IX story that only somebody who's been around for the 50 years would know it. When Donna Lopiano and some of the other Title IX advocates, women's sports advocates, were negotiating what should be the split, they said 50-50. 50% of the resources to women, 50% of the resources to men. And the guys went, "Oh my God, you got to be kidding me. We're not doing that. We'll give you proportionality." 50 years ago, 60% of college students were male. Whoops. So a perfect world is we look at resources allocated to athletes based on the numbers that are participating per gender.
Perfect world. I think just more equity throughout. I mean, just, whether it's looking at the fields and, women speaking up and just trying to have equal opportunities, which is what this is supposed to give us. I don't think we're there yet, but I think developing voices and advocates for young girls is going to be very important. And whether it's legal advocates or mentor advocates, but I think we really need to make sure girls have a better voice in what they really want to do and can make a difference.
I don't have much more to add to that. You two just you knocked it out of the park.
I guess at this time I'll ask if anyone in the audience has any questions for our panelists, or anyone at home on Zoom.
So we're celebrating 50 years, but it really wasn't until 94 when the implementation of Title IX became more enforceable. So, we passed it, but then it took a long time for the implementation to occur. And if you look at the women in the 96 Olympics, Candace Parker has a great video about this, and it's just so powerful. Just of Billie Jean King talks about it, and it's like we we have the cake, but we want the icing too. Hell yes, we want it all. We can't stop. And so if you think about women's basketball, gymnastics, soccer, what about the 1999 women's soccer team when Brandy Chastain, just not for a Nike ad, but just pulled off her top after she made the penalty kick to beat China, where 90,000 people in the Rose Bowl watched girls play soccer. So we see these events, and I think that really hopefully instills in, young girls of what they can do. Maybe not necessarily athletically, but they can do anything.
I think the other piece is the role that the media plays. If you look at the New York Times, you've got box scores upon box scores of men's sports from around the country, professional sports. And, we used to look for the results of the Liberty game, and there'd be like a little thing about this big about the Liberty game. The games weren't, the WNBA games weren't on television. Now there are a lot more that are televised. There are more fans in the stands because they realize, number one, it's more affordable than men's basketball to go to a professional game. But I think there's a huge part that has to do with the media. If you look at women's professional golf and men's professional golf, they are approaching equity, and they're on the TV the same amount of time. And their golfers love golf, whether it's a man or a woman playing golf. And so, my husband's glued to all those golf events all the time. And if people don't see it, they can't dream it. So you might not see it at your school, but if you suddenly see it on television, it makes you think about it. And I think that's probably where in the perfect world, the media would treat men's and women's sports equally in terms of exposure in newspapers and on television.
A good friend of mine had a saying that said, in the marketplace, there is no Title IX. And I think that is actually, I don't think, it is actually true. And so these are the things I think that we still need to prove in terms of women's sports, is that we can capture the marketplace, that we can bring enough ticket buyers, that we can bring enough viewers to the space to get ESPN and the national sports media to pay attention, because those are for-profit businesses. They don't live by Title IX. They'll put on tiddlywinks. I don't think I've seen that yet, but I've seen a lot of things that are somewhat close. Yeah, they'll put whatever is going to pay the bills. And so this is a new challenge here for women's sports is, can we compete for the marketplace dollars that are going to sports?
Thank you. How do you feel that transgender women athletes competing on women's teams, what are your thoughts on that? And how do you think it pertains to Title IX and how that may shift in the years to come?
Yeah, you can give the microphone to the doctor.
I thought that might come up. Recently, Leah Thomas at Penn competed, 2 years as a female and then changed and then as a male. Oh, yeah, excuse me, female and then male. And I feel it's an unfair advantage in that structurally she's a male. I don't know hormonally how long it takes to change for her to be a female. And I think that organizations need to look at what the right thing to do is. There was an article recently in the New York Times. The Yale swimmers felt that this undid everything in Title IX for her to be competing. And there's certain sports where you're better, like in swimming. Renee Richards, the tennis athlete from 4 years ago, went from male to female. He was an ophthalmologist, but I think there has to be a different structure for certain sports, and we can't just say, okay, you're female now and throw you in there. So maybe there needs to be a other category. And I respect their competing. They should compete. Everybody should compete in athletics. The question is, where do you put them so the other athlete is not an unfair advantage in that article, Martina Navratilova was quoted as being, she would be really pissed off if she was competing with a male who became a female and kicked her ass on the court.
I think it's really complicated because you have to think about the rights of the female athletes, the cis female athletes, so those who were born female, and ultimately the rights of someone who transitions to be female because that's who they are. And no one is ever going to be happy, I think, with any of the decisions that are made. FINA, which is the international governing body for sport, just came out with their recommendations, and they had physicians and attorneys and athletes and coaches involved in this large decision making. And what they decided for swimming world championships is that if a male transitions to female before puberty, then there's no restriction on that athlete competing as a female for the rest of their lives. Because the things that make the difference between men and women really happen at puberty. It doesn't happen at birth. If you look at some 13-year-old girls are taller and stronger than 13-year-old boys because the testosterone hasn't hit the little boys yet. But once puberty happens, there are physiologic differences. Lung size is bigger, bones are stronger, hands are bigger, feet are bigger. There's increased height. And so there are clear things that happen structurally that are not undone by someone blocking their testosterone or taking estrogen to be female. So I think they're the first ones to come out, and I think there's going to be a lot of controversy about it, but the plan that they set made sense to me. The other thing that they plan to do at the World Championships is to have open events. So there'll be male events, female events, and open events so that they give athletes who are, high caliber athletes who have transitioned from one sex to the other, the opportunity to compete internationally. And that may be the way of the future, but I'm not sure. I think in the US, every school board's going to have to think about it and every college is going to have to think about it. But they're the first ones to kind of put their idea out for good or for bad. But I think it's an interesting concept that they propose.
There are organizations, the American College of Sports Medicine has had a think tank on this for quite some time, and I think there'll be some consensus statements that out whether it's the higher up or does it end up being each individual college. I think it's a little bit like name, image, likeness. And that's out, and now what do we do with it?
There's another question.
Sunday morning CBS show celebrated Title IX 50 years last Sunday. I don't know if anybody watched it. It was a really great article, but news show, but it talked about marketing and TV networks. And I thought it was interesting where they said there's only 4% of women's sports on networks. And a woman had opened a sports bar, but it was called the Sports Bra. I don't know if anybody saw a little spin on that. And she said that the biggest problem they had, it's exclusively shows women's sports, 3 big TVs, but she said, we're having a problem trying to find the women's sports to show. And I thought that was interesting because growing up, it was the same thing. You either watch tennis all the time, maybe a little bit of golf. And during the Olympics, that was the only time we got to watch women compete on television in the 70s and probably 80s. But now it's gotten a little better. But I thought that little spot on CBS Sunday morning was pretty cool. 4% women's sports on TV.
So this is a marketplace issue. And if you look at the early 90s, as Dr. Ireland has pointed out, there was a resurgence. It was after the Civil Rights or the Title IX Restoration Act was signed. There was again a resurgence of coverage, media coverage, where women's sports got up to over 10%. And I remember, those of you who remember Jim Host, who was very prominent here in Lexington, host communications. And he was all over it, as he was with every new trend, saying this is going to be great because we will be able to tap into a whole new group of advertisers. All right. We've got beer, we got pizza, we got insurance, and we got trucks right now that are spending a ton of money here on men's sports because the viewers are male. And now we have these women's sports. And so now we can have groceries. We can have hair care and skincare products. This is going to be a bonanza because we'll be able to double the investment that's available for sport. It did not happen. Okay. And even today, what we see is with sports consumption. And this is the debate today. If you put more women's sports on TV, will more women watch women's sports? It is not a no-brainer. Your husband is watching the women's golf. My husband watches softball, women's basketball all the time. I work in sports. I don't. Okay. Now I'm not watching any sports on TV. I should admit that. I just lost my job. But it is, who are the consumers? Right now, we still see that 70% of the consumers of regular consumers of sports on television are male. And that percentage goes to between 75 and 80% for women's sports. So the percentage is a smaller audience, but it's even more gender imbalance on the women's sports side. So we've got some real challenges, some real things that we've got to figure out that go beyond just pounding the table and saying, hey, you're a for-profit company, but you've got to put on something that really only is advertising for trucks and insurance and pizza and beer.
I have a comment and then kind of a question. I promise I'm going somewhere with this, but I'm a 40-year-old former cheerleader. I concur, would not do it again. Back in the 90s, training, I have so many injuries, weird injuries that, at 40 years old, I'm really feeling them now. So just wanted to comment on that. But related to that, one of the things that we did not do that we should have done was strength training. We just tumbled and threw people in the air and this and that, and never really learned how to get stronger to be able to do all those things better. And now, as I'm a fitness instructor now, the past 5 years, I've gotten really into strength training, especially powerlifting. And it's interesting when I go in the morning, there are mostly women in the squat racks, which is amazing to me. When I was like, I never would have thought when I was 20 years old, they're all 20, I'm 40, I'm twice their age at Alumni Gym, but I never would have thought that I could even do that. So I wonder, I'm kind of asking about the trickle down effect. Like, we're talking about sports and kind of collegiate activities, but even just being in the gym, like recreationally, I see women doing a lot of things now that I wouldn't have thought to do when I was their age that are traditionally, quote, men's activities like powerlifting. And what do you all feel about that kind of trickle down effect? And what do you all see?
I think we're seeing that, and I think it's great. When I was a swimmer, we would lift weights and do squats and do a lot of things, and I think that you kind of grow up doing that. And this kind of goes back to our initiative of we need to have programs, and it doesn't have to be doing a lot of stuff in a weight room. It can be getting out and jumping rope, or doing a lot of different things. But I think to your point about cheerleaders, still there's no periodization thought of strength training and what you really need to do over the year to improve your success in competition, because it's a 13-month out of 12-month thing. So it just is very difficult. And I think, as you mentioned, you hurt. So we're going to open a women's sports medicine institute with our so that you can come see us. And women drive the healthcare train, right? So I think what you're saying is great, and I encourage everybody. But I think you have to learn some of that early on and be okay with lifting and getting stronger. That strength, balance, and all of it.
I think the other thing that spurred that is CrossFit. And CrossFit gets great television coverage too, the CrossFit games. And I think it's made women realize that you can be strong and you can be powerful and not look like a man. And I think for years, a lot of people did not want to lift weights because they thought that they were going to look like, Arnold Schwarzenegger or something. And that women can get strong and get powerful and you'll be bigger, but you're never going to look like a man if you have estrogen in your system. And I think changing that dynamic when kids are in high school, we often see it after someone tears their ACL. They've never really done any strength training. They play 3 sports a year. They get into PT. They learn how to strength train in PT. And they realize that that's only a positive thing and they're quicker and they can jump higher and all the other things that come from it. So if you're exposed to that when you're in high school, you continue to do it when you get older. Once you hit 30, you lose a certain percentage of strength every year for the rest of your life if you don't actively strength train. And so it's equally important for those of us of a certain age and everything in between to keep doing it because it's how you stay active and healthy and able to get out of a chair when you're 90.
And I think working out and strengthening is very important. It's about body image and about feeling good about yourself. And if you have that, we should do something every day that makes us feel good. And then you're more productive as an individual and as a professional.
Hello. So I have a niece who is 11 years old and she is freakishly good at softball. Like she's going to the Olympics. I just know it. But she has noticed there's more baseball fields than softball fields. The boys' batting cages have lights so they can practice at night. The girls' cages don't. And she had the idea to write a letter to the mayor to see if she can get that, addressed. But I wonder, what would you suggest that women and girls do to kind of advocate for themselves on sort of like the local or level? Because we've talked about collegiate and professional levels, but, what can, high school students and middle school students do on their level?
One of the fundamental problems with Title IX that has been around for 50 years is that the way that you protest is an unfair fight. And what I mean by that is that an 11-year-old has to take on the city government. A college student has to take on the university. The people withstanding under Title IX are those who are the infected class, which is your 11-year-old, high school students. So some of she's on the right track and her parents can get in the mix on her behalf. And all of us who've worked in sports all of our lives go beware of getting parents in the mix. But they are absolutely the critical folks here in pushing their kids. But the plaintiff needs to be the person who's impacted. And so structurally, we have an unfair fight here. And what we talked about a little earlier, internalizing second-class citizen, second-class status, valuing sports that are more popular with men over sports that are more popular with women, and actually institutionalizing inferiority of women's sports. These are all things that we've got to keep pushing back against. But yeah, tell her to write the mayor every day. And to put it online. Social media is a dangerous and very, very powerful tool, and young people know how to use it, to expose wrongs.
So I want to elaborate on this on the middle school and high school level. In the early 80s, the Kentucky High School Athletic Association began the largest Title IX project, probably one of them in the country, to examine all these things we've been talking about today. And we sent teams of people into individual school districts We were required by the Department of Education to visit a quarter of the high schools in the state of Kentucky each year. And that program is still going on. But when we would visit the school and take a look at all the facilities, we went in locker rooms, we went on softball fields, we looked at lighting, et cetera, and did the comparisons. Probably softball was probably the worst area as far as this one and that one as far as baseball, softball. And I want to say this because one of the points that we would make is that, remember, your students' parents are taxpayers in the district. Okay. You hire the superintendents and the principals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So don't think that your voice doesn't matter. So when a girls' program was playing at a park and they had to be off the field in 1 hour, and the guys had lights and a great field, et cetera, don't just sit there idly. Do something about it, because you're the real voice. You're the real voice. And probably as the project went on, after we visited personally all 265 schools or whatever it was in those days, the biggest achievement we made facility-wise was in softball. All of a sudden, the money started happening because the parents were tired of it. They had boys and they had girls in their families, and they wanted the girls to have the same opportunity. I'm not saying it's perfect today, but even at Henry Clay High School, they were playing at Idle Park. Well, guess what? They got a brand under Jake Bell, who was a leader, the principal, who visited our office weekly, brand new softball facility. So it can happen, but that's the type of advocacy that has to happen. Because dad and mom, this day and time, they got a boy and girl, they want them to have the same opportunities. Why would you say to your daughter, you can't have it? They can have it, but we've got to get off our tails and work for it.
Bravo. First dog cage, essay at that time. Rigid debris.
Kind of piggybacking off what you talked about, I did a story several years ago in a community, and you all touched on this. Depending on what community you're in, there's a different understanding of Title IX and what can be done. You also mentioned that parents need to be advocates. But in this community, they really didn't have a true understanding of Title IX, what they could do. Doors were being shut. They didn't know how far they could go or how to even get anything accomplished when leaders at their school are telling them, well, we just don't have the money, and well, there's just nothing we can do. They were able to make changes, but have you seen any kind of closing of that gap in recent years, or is it still as bad as that story I did 4 years ago?
Yes, we are. And we're seeing a closing of the gap. And unfortunately, this is going to have to probably be solved through the courts. And the way that major change happens through the court system is usually with class actions. Because again, if every 11-year-old has to go after this themselves, and every softball team has to go after it themselves, and every volleyball athlete who's not getting appropriate summer access to coaching and preparation has to sue their particular school, it will never happen. But there's a couple of things that are happening right now. One of them is that more and more of these things are being directed at organizations as antitrust violations when things are codified in rules that are Title IX violations. Now you go after, the NCAA has a history of this, as a Title IX or as an antitrust violation where you're codifying discrimination. And the other thing we're seeing now with the attorneys is instead of just going after, there's a case right now in San Diego State dropped their women's rowing team And the attorney that is fighting to get the rowing team back is actually going after damages, not only for the women rowers, but for all the other women at the San Diego State. It was an ESPN article. You can Google it just this week. All the other women at San Diego State who have not had opportunities over time and asking for damage awards. And so when those types of things start happening, we all know about it because we're sitting in the hospital here. Is large damage awards are things that get people's attention much more than a suit one off here and one off there.
I asked Thalethia if she has a comment on this.
Sorry, I should have given it to the lawyer first, but obviously I have no respect for expertise.
But I'm also a mom, and I also played softball back in the day when it was still pitch, and there was no such thing as fast pitch softball. And so I can appreciate the struggle that the parents have. We always had an inferior facility compared to the boys. I grew up in Berea, and I'd like to say that things have changed there. It is much better. I still think that there's a long way to go. Not necessarily there, but in other counties, cities nearby. And one of the things I'm hearing about is, like, on the middle school level, for example, why is there no middle school softball team? We have all these girls who play ball over the summer. Some of them are good. Some of them may be good enough to get college scholarships, but they don't have that opportunity to play at the middle school level. So we're already at a disadvantage when we get to the high school and we're playing in the state tournament. We're playing in front of those recruiters. So that's just one of the things I would like to see a parent who has a child in that area start advocating for. My child's only 8 and she probably will not play sports, especially if I want her to do so. She's going to do the exact opposite. So I'll have my own other battles to fight. But I admire your 11-year-old niece. I want you to encourage her. Like they said, write that mayor every single day. Every day. Call him, email him, send him snail mail. Get the media involved. Go to the local paper. He's here. Find this little girl. Talk to her. Put the mayor on blast. Put them in the public eye. Make them explain to her why she is not as important as her male counterpart. And if you can look her down and tell her that, great. But he's not going to. And don't settle for the no, I'm not going to give you this money. We don't have the money. You can find the money. You can find the money to do whatever you want. Make these girls a priority and tell her to keep fighting. Keep fighting.
We have a question from Zoom. All right. Jennifer says, I have had the honor to work with both Dr. Ireland and Dr. Hannafin in the orthopedic industry, and they're amazing, inspirational female leaders. So shout out to them. And my question to the panel is, 50 years from now, on the 100th anniversary of Title IX, where do you hope we'll be society-wise and in sports? And I think we'll make this our final question here, so we have some time for mingling with our panelists.
Pass it right down to the left. No, I think in the ideal world, first of all, we'll have people of different backgrounds and political views treat each other with respect. That's probably the most important thing that could happen to us 50 years from now. And I think that respect for individuals will continue to encourage individuals to be able to pursue their dreams, whether it be sports, whether it be academics, whether it be a mix of it, with equal opportunity. So I think Title IX, is a push. Think about cycling and just struggling, and someone puts their hand on your back, and all of a sudden you're flying up a hill with a little bit of pressure on your back. I think we can view Title IX as that continued hand on the back, but the people involved still have to do the work to stay on the bike.
I think, continued equity, whether it's media. I think we need to make sure girls can speak up, and they do speak up, however it is, empower girls. Try to figure out the noun that I was, and I don't know if you're born with this, but I think grit is a good word. So I think if you can instill which is nature, nurture, but I just had grit all the time and I just kept on going. And I think people should be encouraged to follow their dreams, and doors will open, not all the time, but I think underrepresented minorities need to have opportunities, whether it's better fields or scholarships or activities like Chicago, so they can get exposure to these things. We work with again on the youth level to get our youth more active. And again, with our initiative, we're just trying to get girls to be more active because our state is one of overweight, diabetic smokers. So it's just, we just need to change that culture.
I'd like to be an optimist and say 50 years from now, the 11-year-old who will be 61 doesn't need to be on a panel like this because it won't be needed. And we can say, hey, do you remember when girls and women didn't have opportunities in education or orthopedic surgery or rowing or volleyball or whatever? And it can be kind of a laugh line. Like, really? There was a telephone that worked like that? Like you put your finger in it? So let's stay hopeful. And then we'll look back and we'll say, okay, but this kind of stuff doesn't just happen. Exactly all the debates we're having in our country right now. Today, we're still in the fight.
Well, thank you all for joining us here today. Please feel free to reach out to me or our team if you have any questions. And I think our panelists and our moderator, let's give them one big more thank you and round of applause. And I think they'll stay around for a few minutes if you have other individual questions. Thank you all.